Kick off our morning, first of all, by welcoming you here today. The weather's finally starting to behave like spring. Feels good. Feels too good to be inside of it, so fortunately. Welcome. And today's distribution class is going to be, I've got, for the first time really, I'm starting to use educational videos embedded into my slide presentations, kind of break up the presentation so it's not just me up here all day talking, and hopefully we'll get some good interaction in that. We're talking about distribution systems and concepts, so probably all have some experiences out there that we might be able to talk about or relate to some of these ideas or components. I've been with MRWA Water Association now for almost 15 years, doing training, multi-day certification training on the water distribution side, and doing technical assistance in systems. So today, of course, a one-day training class for renewable credit. We'll have our, at some point, be passing around later, a little later, our rosters. Before I came aboard the MRWA Water Association, I was managing the surface water treatment plant in the city of Fredericktown. And so that's my background in water. And I'd like to start this morning by, first of all, telling you we've got donuts and coffee, courtesy of the city of Sikeston, and a beautiful facility here this morning. We appreciate the hospitality Sikeston offers. We have our restrooms right here to the side of the room here, and in the hall leading out to the front door as well, set restrooms. And I will ask that we take our noise makers and silence them today, and of course we'll have a couple of breaks in the morning and afternoon and lunch to check on messages and that. MRWA Water Association more than a year ago stopped sending out mailers for our events or training events. So what we're urging everyone to do now more than ever, now that we all carry these miniature computers around with us, is to get more adept, and that includes staffing, for us to do that too, and MRWA Water Association staff. Get more used to going online, MRWA.org, scrolling down that homepage and finding events in order of the dates they occur on the calendar. And once you do that, see something that intrigues you or interests you, you want to know more information about, you hit the little more button, it expands and gives you more details, and you can then register right online. So we try to make it as easy as possible for you, and continue to look at those because we're always adding classes, just like I urge you to look at the DNR updated list, because they're always adding new training courses. If something is not anywhere near you and you're needing renewal credit, a couple weeks from now there might be 3 or 4 classes in the area. So you just never know. It's probably a good idea to at least once a month check online. Check our website, check MRWA Water Association, check DNR's website as well. So what I'd like to do before we launch in is make sure I've covered all the little housekeeping things. Our introductions is what I want to get to. I told you a little bit about me. Feel free to tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you are, what system you're with, how long you've been there, what you specifically do at the system, or anything you'd like to share with us. I might start right on this side here.
Ralph, I work in the city of Morley, been there a little over 17 years, run water and wastewater.
Okay. First name was Ralph.
My name is Keith Elliott. I work for Sac City BMU. Work at the wastewater plant, sludge hauler. Been there a little over 17 years.
Okay, good long stretch.
Michael Gant from the city of Water Division, Chandler Rock Water Treatment Plant, surface water treatment plant. I've been there 37 years.
30 seconds. It's gonna be hard to top that. Okay.
Mike Williams, City of New Haven. I work for water and wastewater. I've been there for 42 years.
42 years. Is that right?
Looking forward to getting out.
Well, now, I asked Mike how long he has, and he says 4 years about. How long do you have, Mike?
3 years, or actually 2 years, 8 months, and so many days.
You probably have it down to the hour by now.
I've got to figure it out.
That's a long, long time. And that's city of Maverick the whole time?
Well, no, I've been there 40 years, with the city of Liberty for 2 years.
Okay. So Little Burn was your training ground, huh?
And old Johnny Wright, if you remember him, that's where I started at, and with William Koski for 28 years.
Okay.
Been there, seen it, done it, looking forward not to doing it.
Looking forward not to doing it anymore. I can hear that. After 42 years, my goodness. Okay.
My name is Barry Shirkey. I'm with the city of Saxon as well, and I've been with the city total 25 years. I spent 6 years out at the power plant, and I've been out with the wastewater plant for 18 years. Shift operator, lab tech, rag puller.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Good long stretch there too. We talk about the aging of the water operators, but usually they're not in the same place that long. We've got some good long histories here to talk about. Okay.
Brandon Parcel, work for Wayne Butler, District Number 4. Kind of training right now, but I'm working with leaks and just maintaining the system.
Okay, so how long you been there?
A couple weeks now.
Couple weeks, okay. So you'll be going on to get your certification and all that stuff?
Yes, sir.
Very good. All right, good.
Jennifer Pierce, manager for Wayne Butler number 4, and I've been there 13 years.
Yeah, I know you've been around for a little while there, haven't you? That's good.
Jason Pierce. I work for number 4 also. Still trying to learn to keep my mouth shut, basically. Fell into it, been in construction my whole life, and had an opening, wanted a little more security. And ain't nothing more secure than working on a system that when you fix 10 leaks, you instantly get 10 more.
Oh no.
Looking in the ground, been there a couple years. All the numbers are going right now, and just kind of keep on trucking. Got to roll with the punches at number 4.
Yeah.
Every day can be an adventure.
And the adventure, is that somewhat due to, are those lines real old there?
Yeah, all of our service lines are what's failing, and that high pressure not helping nothing either. So we got a lot of different things we're trying to get dialed in and set up a little bit. The service lines is old black rolled welded line or something like that. They're just getting pinholes in them. The pressure we got, and you fix them, it just goes and finds another spot to blow out. We put in 3 new well motors between 2 Februarys and lightning strikes. Out of 17 years, never been hit by nothing, and everything's just it's a whirlwind over there. Not many people want to help, but this guy here, he might be hopefully the next guy to continue on keeping it going good when we get it back where it's supposed to be.
Yeah. Wow. Well, you describe an image of a lot of hard work, but if I'm just new at the system, I might think of that as job security. Boy, they've got a lot of problems. They need help. Okay.
Tony Crawford, Greenwood Job Corps, water and wastewater. Been there about 14 years.
14 years. That's good. Good. And how many kids do you turn out every year? Did you kind of graduate them from there? Or?
Yeah, I couldn't answer that. I don't know.
Okay, you're not one of the instructors. You're
No.
maintaining the grounds and
Exactly.
the water system and all that. Okay.
And fix what they tear up.
Yeah. Okay.
David Litchfield, Bingo Job Corps, wastewater. I've been there about 10 years.
Okay, good stretch of time.
Kim Hawksworth, I work for Liberty Utilities in our Jackson, Missouri office. I work in the gas right now doing mapping, but before I worked there, I was there 5 years. I worked for Alliance Water Resources in Cape for 21 years, so I'm trying to keep my water license up.
Oh, okay.
Liberty has water, gas, and electric, so
Yeah.
an opportunity.
Well, that's good. You've been also in business for a long while then, in the utility business in general, haven't you? That's real good. And Jim Emmerline and I, he says, pretend I'm not here, but Jim, I'd like you to at least tell us about your program, about what you're here about doing, and maybe about our friendship.
Okay.
Come on
Like Tom
up.
said, no, I'm glad back here. Like Tom said, I'm Jim Miller. I've been with Missouri Water about 9 years. Previous to that, I managed the county water district number 1, county district, real spread out system. I'm a management circuit rider for Missouri Water. I do energy assessments, rate studies. Right now, today, we're videoing Tom's session because we're probably going to use it for apprenticeship training, which is apprenticeship is a brand new program that Missouri Water has come out with just a few months ago. Department of Labor certified, where in 2 years someone would become a journeyman water or wastewater operator with the Department of Labor certification, also along with your DNR certification. So today we're videoing this because the apprenticeship has extracurricular training to go with it, and this seems like it would probably be a good match for that, so we're going to video it and see if it would fit into that real well. It's a 2-year program. It can be new hires, it can be somebody that's already hired. The system trains them on the job. Assign a mentor, which would be like one of you all would be their mentor, teaching them every day to dig stuff that they need to know, and then we give them the 288 extracurricular hours of broad scope of water or wastewater, so they get a broader scope of what they would get in 2 or 3 years just working at the system. They get the big picture along with what they're doing right there. So ignore me today because I'll be in and out. I've got a lot of stuff going on. So y'all listen to Tom, and I'll ignore him and do my stuff.
Well, that's unanimous. They're all going to ignore me, so lead the way. Thank you, Jim. We're excited about that, though, the apprenticeship program, and we'll be rolling it out shortly in the near future, I believe, and we'll be bringing in apprentices, and Jim will kind of keep Missouri Water Association updated on the progress of the program, and then we'll be communicating that to everybody as well. So it's always nice to run into systems. I'm sure Jim welcomes it when he comes and talks, comes to a system and introduces himself, talks to somebody, finds out their involvement with training their new staff members and what they're doing in that, and maybe how that might integrate into the bigger picture of the apprenticeship program. So, well, let's get into all things distribution system. Talk a little bit about vertical turbine centrifugal pumps here. I've got, like I said, quite a bit of videos to integrate into this presentation today, and I think you'll find that some of these are really good at giving you a visual of what we're talking about, those concepts that all too frequently, I know even in my own water certification class, it's a bunch of theory, a bunch of talk and lecture, but it's very little connecting the dots. Hopefully some connecting the dots we'll get today with the videos, especially Adam, the person we'll see first. I've got, I think, 3 videos from him. He's an excellent instructor on the video. The only thing bad on the video, I'll mention it now because I'll probably forget when we get there, and it'll be just a few slides from now, is after he introduces himself, some background music comes up and it's really distorted, like it's been recorded at too loud a volume. I tried to lower my volume and it doesn't work, so it's about the original recording on YouTube that's, they should have potted that music down a little lower under it, but that only is momentary and then it goes away, so we'll hear that over and over. Mechanical devices, okay, so a pump is a mechanical device. What do we use pumps for? What are some of those things? I want to make this more interactive and participatory, getting folks to talk rather than just sit there and listen to me. Because after you listen to one person for a few minutes, quickly gets old, you know. So we can talk, have a conversation, maybe it'll be a little more interesting, and we'll all feel a little better about today's class when we leave. So, what do we use pumps for?
I use a lot of sub pumps.
You say that again?
A lot of sub pumps, cut the holes out, as they pour water a lot, so the
Okay.
little pumps help just as well as the big ones.
Okay, good point. Some pumps to get water out of meter pits or other places that are low and submerged and you need to get at for work. What other things would we use pumps for?
Move material and fluids from one place to another.
Okay, good. Moving material such as fluids from one place to another, right? So really, our primary driver of water in our systems is our pumps. Whether they're raw water pumps or high service pumps, well pumps, we use them for moving fluid, moving water primarily. Anything else? We use pumps to increase or sustain pressure, right? To raise water to elevated areas such as elevated storage tanks or hilly terrain where our service lines run. So we use pumps for a number of things. Some pump classifications, we have low lift service pumps. Those pumps typically are meant for water with lots of total dissolved solids in them. I would think of those more in the water world as raw water pumps at a surface water intake. High service pumps with water that is pretty purified and clean and free of a lot of total dissolved solids, finished water at a treatment plant. Our well pumps, I should ask, I know you already introduced yourselves, but surface water, we have one surface water system, I believe, present, right? Mike's present. Everybody else, groundwater systems, okay, groundwater. And then anybody got treatment plants? I know Sykeston does. Anybody else doing any kind of treatment? Just pumping straight from the well to the storage tank, maybe? Everybody disinfect in here? Good morning.
Morning, sorry I'm late.
Oh, that's all right. Hey, we got everybody a chance to introduce themselves. Why don't we interrupt just a minute and have you do that?
Travis Crawford from Lake Walpole State Park.
Okay, and how long have you been there?
10 years.
10 years. All right, well, welcome aboard. We have booster pumps. Anybody use booster pumps in your system? Okay, to fill storage tanks primarily, or sometimes we use chemical boosters to boost chlorine out in the distant parts. Does anybody do that? Nobody? Okay. Standby pumps. Standby pumps are good for use for if we have extra demand, we can add another pump in line, provide a little more water or a little more pressure to raise the water. They're good as simply a backup pump if one primary pump is out of service for maintenance. High lift service and line shaft vertical turbine pumps move treated water, then water into our distribution system and increase and sustain pressure. Despite the name though, high lift pumps don't have a whole lot of lift. What is the theoretical lift of a pump? Does anybody know what the theoretical suction lift of a pump is?
25 feet.
Say it again.
20 to 25 feet.
Okay, that one.
23?
Okay, I'm going to say you're both talking about maybe what's real, what's practical, what we can truly get out of a pump. But in theory, it's high, a little higher than that. In theory, it's 34 feet. Now, where do we get 34 feet? If I have 1 pound of pressure, how high will that 1 pound of pressure raise water?
2.3 feet.
2.31 feet, right? So does anybody know off the top of your head what is atmospheric pressure? What's atmospheric pressure? It is at sea level, atmospheric pressure is 14.7 pounds. Now, I just told you to turn off your phones. Who wants to volunteer? You got a calculator on your phone? Who would like to volunteer to multiply 2.31 feet for every 1 pound of pressure? 2.31 times 14.7 psi. 14.7, I think Mike is doing it.
So are you saying this lift depends on the barometric pressure
It does.
on the vacuum?
It does, yes. And it also assumes everything is perfect and there's no lost efficiency or any other variables that influence it. That's exactly right, Travis. Michael, what you get?
33.957.
Okay, good, 33.957, or we would round it to 34 feet. That, in theory, is how high we can lift through suction lift on a pump. But as you said, 20 to 25 feet. I've seen 25 feet, even as much as 26 feet. Some kind of depends on the pump. But around 25 feet is what we actually practically can lift through the suction of the pump. So let's see, that covers that. Here's our first video. Again, a reminder about the distortion a little bit. It's distortion. I have to just get out of the view and go to that and click on that. And do this.
Hi, I'm Adam. This is the Machine Tech video blog, and today I'd like to talk a little bit about centrifugal pumps. Centrifugal pumps are definitely one of the most common machines in the industrial landscape. In fact, they're second in number only to electric motors. And when you consider that electric motors are used to drive centrifugal pumps, it's safe to say that the lion's share of energy usage in the world goes towards pumping fluids with centrifugal pumps. So if you're an industrial maintenance technician, mechanic, machinist, you'll come across these machines at some point in your career, so it will do you some good to know how they work in the first place. In general, a pump is a machine which converts mechanical energy into the kinetic energy of a pumped fluid for the purpose of transporting that fluid from one point to another. But in order to be classified as a centrifugal pump, a pump needs to have two unique components. The first is a rotating disc with curved blade-like veins on it, called an impeller. And the second is a specially shaped pipe called a volute casing, which contains the impeller and the pumped fluid. In the most basic sense, here's how a centrifugal pump works. Fluid enters the pump at the center of the impeller, called the suction eye. Friction between the fluid and the surface of the rotating impeller causes the fluid to rotate. Think about it like this. Just like the friction between the road and the rubber in your tires propels your car forward, the impeller gains traction on the fluid as it spins in contact with it. The rotating fluid is thrown to the outside of the impeller by centrifugal force, a phenomenon which causes objects revolving around a center point to move away from the center. This is how the fluid picks up kinetic energy from the impeller. And this method of energy transfer by centrifugal force is why these pumps are called centrifugal pumps. The amount of energy actually added to the fluid is dependent on 3 factors: the density of the fluid itself, the impeller's speed of rotation, and the impeller's diameter. From the impeller, the fluid is released into the chamber of the volute casing and directed around to the discharge outlet and ultimately into the system. Let me take a minute to set the record straight. A very, very common misconception is that these curved vanes help to move fluid by cupping it and pushing it through the pump. So then the correct direction of rotation for this impeller would be clockwise, right? Well, that's not really what the vanes are there for. The vane's purpose is to conduct the fluid along the smoothest possible path as it travels through the pump. Backwards curved vanes help to stabilize flow conditions at high speeds and reduce demands on the motor. The correct direction of rotation for this impeller is actually counterclockwise. And you can always tell the correct direction of rotation of an impeller just by looking at the way that the vanes are curved. It's important to add that because of the way that centrifugal pumps impart energy to fluid, the impeller must always be fully submerged and in direct contact with the pumped fluid. As we can see from this little light-duty pump, a centrifugal pump will not pump air and it will not suck fluid through piping like a straw. So before the pump is turned on, the casing must be flooded with fluid, a process known as priming. And during operation, there must be a sufficient amount of available fluid under positive pressure at the suction inlet of the pump to replace the fluid which is being discharged. This is usually accomplished by placing the pump below the fluid level of the source tank. If the pump is ever starved of fluid, certainly the pump's performance will be affected, but it's actually more serious than that. It's possible that the pressure at the suction eye of the impeller will drop below the vapor pressure of the pumped fluid. If that happens, then the fluid will effectively boil. Little bubbles will form, travel partway through the impeller, and then collapse at supersonic speeds like little bullets, taking bits of the impeller along with it. This is a condition known as cavitation, and a pump that's experiencing cavitation is not long for this world. I know that I use these little water bubbles in my animations to illustrate the fluid path through the pump. But actually, that kind of entrained air or any other gas is the worst case scenario for a centrifugal pump. Let's talk about the volute casing. Volute refers to the shape of the casing. A volute is a geometric shape defined as a spiral with an ever-increasing radius, like a snail shell. Hopefully you'll notice that the volute chamber on this pump doesn't stay the same size all the way around. It actually increases in area closer to the discharge outlet. And at the point where the discharge outlet begins and the volute chamber sort of starts over, there's a wedge-like protrusion called the cutwater. The cutwater physically separates the discharge outlet and the volute chamber, and it ensures that fluid actually leaves the pump instead of just recirculating over and over again inside of the volute chamber. Now, the increasing area of the volute chamber is essential to the function of the pump because that's how the pump develops pressure. We've talked about how the impeller imparts kinetic energy to the pumped fluid. And when I say kinetic energy, think of it as the speed of the fluid flowing through the pump. But flow speed is only half the equation. A pump also needs to be able to develop sufficient pressure to meet the requirements of the system. Usually this involves overcoming gravity by raising fluid from a lower elevation to a higher elevation and overcoming the resistance or friction of the pipes which conduct the fluid. Think of pressure as the ability to accomplish a task and flow speed as how quickly the task can be accomplished. To build pressure, the pump has to do some science magic to convert kinetic energy into pressure energy. As fluid travels through the volute chamber, it actually starts to slow down as the area of the volute chamber increases. That's because flow rate, or the amount of fluid which is moved during a given length of time, is dependent on 2 factors. One is the speed of the fluid, and the other is the size of the chamber through which it's moving, meaning how much of the fluid is moving at that speed. If the flow rate is constant, then an increase in the size of the chamber would result in a corresponding decrease in the speed of the fluid. This is where a guy by the name of Daniel Bernoulli comes in. He discovered 300 years ago that there's an inverse relationship between a fluid's velocity, or speed, and its pressure. Meaning that if the velocity goes up, then the pressure comes down. And if the velocity goes down, then the pressure automatically goes up. So as the fluid is slowing down in the ever-expanding volute chamber, it's also picking up pressure. So that by the time the fluid reaches the discharge outlet, a great deal of its kinetic energy has been transformed into pressure energy. And I think that's a pretty amazing little trick. Well, there's your introduction to centrifugal pumps, their function, the main parts, and the basic theory of how they work. Pumps and pumping are rich and complex topics, and we'll definitely be coming back to them in later videos. But for now, that's it from the Machine Tech video blog. I hope you learned something.
Again, he does a good job of presenting material in a way that is pretty understandable, easy to see. This is a kind of corroded outer body of a volute design for a centrifugal pump. And then this is a well pump with multiple stages of closed impellers, and you can see multiple impellers here in series that we would typically use to increase our discharge head or our ability to raise the water to a certain height in our distribution system to fill our highest point, like our elevated storage tanks, or to overcome resistance in the line. Centrifugal pumps have a rotating impeller, and which way does it turn again? The impeller turns if the fins are aimed curved that way. Would I turn my hand clockwise or counterclockwise? Clockwise, right? So the back or the hump of the curve is moving in forward direction and not the cupped portion of the curvature. They offer continuous smooth flow. Head pressure will decrease the flow, so that's a limiting factor on centrifugal pumps. The higher the head pressure against the pump, the less volume in gallon per minute flow is going to be delivered from the pump's capacity. Here we have an impeller, a closed impeller, and we see the shrouds on both the top and the bottom of the impeller, like a closed plate, almost like a flange plate on both top and bottom of the fins or the curvatures. That's what we would typically see in finished water or well water that we're pumping into our distribution system. The case, as Adam talked about, converts. There's some saying from the past that says, and maybe that was Bernoulli who coined this phrase. They usually say it was Einstein. It was some genius, mathematical genius, who in physics determined that energy, you can never really destroy energy. All you can do with energy is have it change form. So if you take a garden hose and you put your thumb over the opening of the end of the garden hose to cover about half of the hose opening, the water is going to shoot farther out, right? Arc farther out before it curves down to the ground. What we're doing, and what I was told that was incorrect when I was new as a water operator at the City of Burtontown Water Treatment Plant, by the senior operator, he mistakenly said, you're increasing the pressure. You're not increasing the pressure, you're decreasing the pressure, you're increasing the velocity. You're increasing the velocity so the water shoots out farther, but you're decreasing the pressure by choking down the line. So when you get to a reduction in a line, if you go from an 8-inch down to a 6-inch water main, You have now decreased the pressure for those customers, but you've increased the velocity in the line. So in this case, on the volute, as he was talking about that snail design or that increasing curvature spiral, as the water goes in the narrow opening, as the vanes of the impeller send it in through the eye of the opening there at the casing, it's so choked down that the water is rushing in rapidly and high velocity flow. But as that chamber is expanding, the velocity is slowing, and proportionally with it, the pressure is increasing. So that's what that is actually doing, is converting velocity pressure, or velocity to pressure energy, two different types of energy forms. Yes, sir?
I guess I'm having a brain fart understanding that if you're giving them 50 PSI in the pipe, you cut it from 8 inch to 6 inch, and you reduce pressure, but you're decreasing volume, but you're increasing pressure. Is it not going to be the same when it gets to the outlet? Because if you decrease the volume, increase
Velocity.
the velocity, it's going to equal out the same, is it not? Would it not be the same? But if you're getting more water flowed to you, where are you losing? I mean, are you going to notice it?
You're going to notice it. Your pressure, if you had a pressure gauge, let's say 20 feet upstream from where that reduction is, and you check the pressure, and then 20 feet downstream from where the reduction, the line reduces down, you would see a drop in the pressure. Yes, sir. But if you were measuring velocity, you would see the reduced line have higher velocity.
Well, I've always thought I understood that. If you decrease the velocity, you're getting more water quicker.
More water quicker.
Quicker.
Exactly. Or less water quicker.
Well,
Really?
less water quicker.
Less water quicker.
So, but it'd still be noticeable at the outlet. So you have an outlet in that you.
Yeah, it would still be noticeable. The same is true even if you don't have a reduction in a line. If the water is traveling downstream in a line with no bends, no valves, no obstruction, no calcification in the line, no tuberculation, it will decrease in pressure as it travels over time, just by virtue of the fact that it is getting farther away from the momentum that pushes it in the first place.
Yeah, but you're talking about that. You're talking, I understand, the section pipe, the iron buildup and all that. You're going to lose volume.
But even if you had none of that, just as the water travels farther and farther and farther out from its source.
Restriction to the friction of the line. What's your saying there?
I'm saying if everything is perfect, if it's a brand new PVC line, no corrosion, nothing, it's brand new, no reductions, no bends, just as it goes farther from its energizing source, that pump that's pumped it, or gravity, if it's a gravity-fed system from an elevated storage tank, the farther it goes out from that source, the more it's going to lose its pressure, going to lose pressure. So that is somewhat problematic for our water lines as we go out into systems. Imagine when we go out to the end of our system ends here today, but 10 years from now, we've added a subdivision on the edge of town or near a district. We've added an area and put some more customers on, but there are only a few customers, so we think, well, let's just go ahead and take that 6-inch line and make it a 4-inch, because that's going to be plenty for those 12 people that now I'm gonna add to our line. Well, they're already gonna get less pressure even if we didn't reduce that line, because they're on that farther end of that line. And then we're gonna give them even less pressure by reducing it. And then that becomes problematic if over time, we extend our line even farther, because now we're adding even more customers. That could be short-sighted whenever we do a reduction of a line. It could be short-sighted if the potential is there to extend line and add more customers. What's that?
That's when you need the booster pump.
That's where the booster pump comes in. You're right. That would help. The booster pump would help. But you would still be in a smaller line and would still then probably give you increased pressure in that line, but it would still not probably match the original larger line. It would just increase, in some cases, the velocity, I would think.
Yeah, we're passing the pump into the household.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So if that, yes.
I'm sorry, but I got one other question.
No, that's what this is about.
I live in that situation. See, I've never lived in the city that I worked for the whole 40-some years. I live in a water district. And I think it's about 6-7 mile run that I'm on. And my line alone is 2 miles long. And what they done when they set my meter, they went and set a 3/4 inch meter with 5/8 hole.
Good.
But they increased the line to me. They actually come in and put a service line connected to my well, 1.25 inches. What was the purpose of that? I mean, I don't understand. They said something about volume. I said, yeah, there's volume in that line, but it's not going to help you one way or the other. If you're from 3/4, 1.25 back down to 3/4, I don't see the purpose of that.
I don't
They tried to explain to me that.
On that, Mike, I don't, but maybe somebody else understands that. Would that improve the pressure in the home by, it seems to me, once you've choked it down,
You've choked it down, it's there.
you have now no better than that pressure that you've choked it down to, no matter what you do downstream. But Jim, what are your thoughts on that?
The old time theory is for that, your pressure's gonna be the same. Like he's talking, that's when the pump's running. When the pump's not running, your elevator pressure is gonna even out and be the same. But the theory has always been flow on those lines, where if you need a large flow, 3/4 won't provide it, but it's for the initial shot of that bigger line, they did that, and I don't know if it's true or not, but it's an old theory, where if you need a surge of water right quick, then you have it with a bigger line, but then your pressure, it's not gonna make much difference, really.
So it doesn't help the pressure, but it gives you more volume in that.
It gives you more volume if you need it, but the 3/4 meter, 5/8 meter can only flow so much anyway.
So much,
Some point in
that's it.
time, if you have a high flow situation, it's not going to provide it anyway. It's just for the initial flow is what's happening forward, and I've never seen it really help. Some people do it like if your house is 1,000 feet away from the meter, they put a bigger line just so you have more volume right there initially. Who knows?
So it might work, but we're not really sure that would do much of other than, say, washing machine pulls on and pulls a lot of water all at once in a cycle, and maybe that helps with something like that, a high-use utility or appliance that would pull water. But I don't know that it would really, it's certainly not, in my belief, it would correct the reductions, lower pressure now. It wouldn't help there.
I don't really think it will, because even if you got the bigger line, when that line goes, that's only going to be replaced by what the meter's going to flow. So therefore you're only going to get that amount anyway.
That's what I would think. Yeah.
But I've seen it done for years. I don't know where the theory comes from.
All right, so let's see here. Mechanical seal, no visible leakage. Alternative is having a packing gland with packing. We might have something like this Teflon graphite packing here that we see in this image. Packing glands keep the air, dirt, and grit that packing does out. And then lubrication, the leakage around that packing gland is what's really cooling and lubricating the shaft. The lantern ring, we'll see one in our upcoming video. A lantern ring is really a metal piece inserted kind of between the packing rings. We didn't have a lantern ring at my high service pumps or low service pumps at my water treatment plant. And I believe they're more of a practical thing when you're talking about wastewater, the clean water side. You're not going to want water dripping and slinging and splashing around from that source that you're treating at a wastewater plant. There you want to import finished water or drinkable kind of water in there for that process, because that's not a very sanitary thing. Water can spray out and splash and spring, you know. So I think lantern rings are more popular in a setting in a wastewater facility. And Adam talks a little bit more about the whole idea of packing here in this next video.
Hi, I'm Adam. This is the Machine Tech video blog, and today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about compression packing. Anytime a shaft penetrates a fluid-containing chamber, a leak path is created. Let's take this pump, for example. It's driven by a motor and is supported by bearings on the outside of the fluid chamber. But the impeller driven by the shaft has to be submerged in the fluid inside of the chamber in order to pump that fluid. That means that the shaft is going to have to enter the chamber in two places, here and here. Now, unless you want to flood the room and empty the piping system, those holes are going to need to be sealed. But they have to be sealed in such a way that the shaft can still spin freely with minimal friction. Now, there are two generally accepted devices used to accomplish this task: mechanical seals and compression packing. Mechanical seals use two very flat and highly polished surfaces to create a gap so tiny that not even a single droplet of fluid can squeeze through. Compression packing, on the other hand, is pretty low tech. It's essentially just rope that's stuffed around the shaft and then compressed tightly to prevent excessive leakage. As we'll see in a moment, compression packing leaks constantly, it damages shafts, and it requires frequent adjustment and replacement. For these reasons, it's been supplanted by mechanical seals in most applications since the proliferation of mechanical seals in the 1950s. But because of the relatively low upfront costs of compression packing, it is still in use. In this video, we'll cover the basics and selection of compression packing, and we'll leave replacement procedures for a follow-up video. Compression packing is an ancient technology. As far back as 5,000 years ago, sailors were faced with a common problem. Boats and ships often have a rudder or a fixed pivoting oar at the rear of the vessel for steering. The rudder is connected by a shaft to a control handle called a tiller on the deck. If the rudder shaft penetrates the hull of the vessel below the waterline, then water can leak into the bilge. So ancient sailors solved this problem by taking old pieces of clothing, sailcloth, rope, and anything else they could get their hands on, covering it with animal fat or wax, and packing it into the gap around the shaft. Eventually, little box-shaped housings were constructed around the shaft, and a gland was installed which could tighten down against the packing material, compressing it and improving the seal. Thus, compression packing, the stuffing box, and the packing gland were born. As we can see in our example pump, this basic sealing mechanism has remained relatively unchanged for millennia. However, there have been some improvements in packing construction and materials. The compression packing available today typically has a square cross-section and is sold in standard sizes as individual pre-cut rings or in bulk quantities in large coils. There are multiple types of construction, including metal foil packing, for applications where other types of packing would be too soft and would tend to extrude out of the stuffing box. But the dominant type of packing has a braided fabric construction. Material options range from plant fibers, animal fibers, and mineral fibers to synthetic plastics and even metals. Flax is a plant fiber that's been the industry standard for many, many years. It's cheap, readily available, and it offers good sealing for general purpose applications. Synthetic aramid fibers like DuPont's Kevlar are even more abrasion resistant, and they can handle higher temperatures and shaft speeds. Another common plastic is polytetrafluoroethylene, more commonly abbreviated as PTFE, or known by its trade name, Teflon. It has very good lubricity and excellent chemical resistance. Because it's non-reactive, it's often used in applications where process fluid contamination is completely unacceptable, like in the food industry. To help reduce heat generated from contact with the rotating shaft, this bulk fiber material is impregnated with some kind of a lubricant, like oil, grease, wax, graphite, or various synthetics. In the last 30 years, industry has embraced a mixture of PTFE and graphite impregnated with a high-temperature lubricant that often goes by the trade name GFO. Now, although there's no one-size-fits-all packing solution, this material is about as close as it gets. It has a very wide range of applications and it boasts a very long life, but the trade-off is that it's ridiculously expensive. The many options for bulk fiber material and lubricant offer up an almost infinite number of combinations. In the end, packing selection comes down to operating temperature, sealing pressure, shaft speed, and chemical compatibility with the process fluid. But you should really ask your local vendor to determine which specific type of packing is right for your application. Because of the way that it forms a seal, compression packing has to grip the shaft tightly during operation, and this inevitably leads to all types of problems. Compression packing generates a lot of friction, and that puts strain on motors and produces large amounts of heat, which must be dissipated. Maybe you've noticed that I've been saying that packing prevents excessive leakage, not that it prevents leakage entirely. That's because packing has to leak a little bit during operation. In an application where there's infrequent movement of the shaft, then the packing can be fully compressed to stop leakage entirely. Take this gate valve, for example. Actually, this one uses O-rings, but many gate valves do use compression packing to seal around the stem that raises and lowers the gate. But in reciprocating or rotating machines like our pump, some amount of leakage is necessary to lubricate and cool the packing. For non-synthetic materials, the leakage rate is about 15 drops per minute, and synthetic materials require a little more leakage, around 30 drops per minute. This persistent leakage is one of the unavoidable pitfalls of using packing as a seal, but without it, the packing would quickly burn up and stop sealing altogether. In order to further improve lubrication or to flush away abrasive grit and dirt, an external flushing line can be plumbed to the stuffing box. No, usually this is just the process fluid, plumbed directly from the fluid chamber. But if the process fluid is too abrasive or chemically incompatible to be used as a flushing fluid, an external fluid source can be used. It's usually water, and it's pumped directly to the stuffing box. Now, external flushing lines typically go hand in hand with devices called lantern rings. A lantern ring is a metal or plastic ring with grooves and holes in it that's installed in the stuffing box in place of a ring of packing. Its job is to redirect the flushing fluid throughout the stuffing box, and therefore it should be installed so that it's in alignment with the flushing line port. Another unavoidable pitfall of using compression packing is the damage done by abrasive particles grinding against the shaft. Now, these particles can come from the packing, from the process fluid, or somewhat surprisingly, from the shaft itself. You see, metals corrode to form oxides on their surfaces, whether it's iron oxide from steel, chromium oxide from stainless steel, copper oxide from bronze, or aluminum oxide from aluminum alloys. These oxides are extremely hard and abrasive. It's the same stuff used in abrasive grinding wheels. Contact between the shaft and packing causes the oxides on the surface of the shaft to embed themselves in the packing rings, which then grind grooves into the shaft. Eventually, the shaft will be so worn down that it'll have to be replaced. One way of dealing with this is to use a sacrificial sleeve which fits over the shaft and can be easily replaced when it wears down without having to replace the entire shaft. Perhaps the most frustrating thing about compression packing is that it needs to be adjusted periodically. During operation, lubricant squeezes out of the packing and the packing wears, which causes the leakage rate to exceed the minimum required for lubrication and cooling. So maintenance staff must regularly inspect the seal for excessive leakage and tighten the packing gland if necessary. When tightening the packing gland no longer effectively controls the leakage rate, then all the lubricant has been squeezed out and the packing needs to be replaced. That's your introduction to compression packing, its function, its origins, its construction, and some of the considerations for its application. And that's it for today from the Machine Tech video blog. I hope you learned something.
Close up the thing. Okay, yeah, I've seen that already. Didn't know which one we started out. Flip through that real quick. There we are. So shaft sleeve, replaceable sleeves, packing rings to bear against, extend the shaft line, wear, restricts flow between the impeller discharge and the suction, prevent excessive circulation. Bearings lessen the resistance between the pump and the motor. They tend to make an audible noise when they start wearing, and we tend to cite that by over greasing them, we increase the heat around the bearings to the extent that they actually can fail prematurely. So too much grease can be a bad thing. Pump starts, inspect, impeller submerged. The foot valve holds in water, as Adam was talking about the first video there. Our vacuum pump replaces the air with the water. Reduce the problems with the pump by starting the pump with the discharge valve closed, typically, usually activated during a 3-minute delay from a time delay relay device. Amperage would increase if there are abnormal demands. Record pump pressure and outputs. See if there's any abnormal noise and vibration, things to just be aware of when running pumps. If there's excessive heat or electrical odor, I always say when you're going in and checking a pump, just be real aware of your senses, because we can get so used to sounds of traffic on a highway that we tune it out, or other noises, any abnormal noises, raspy sound from bearings. If we get just caught up in being distracted, we might not even notice. And down the road, we might wonder, if we finally do notice, I wonder if that's been like that for a while. And it's good to know today it's different from what it was yesterday or last week, whenever it was I last checked. Or that odor, that little different electrical kind of smell, is that always like that, or is that new today? It's really important to know. Today is new. It's today something's wrong, something's different, to just kind of really be aware of. Avoid damage from too little leakage at the shaft, or score the shaft. He showed that great example there in that second video. Now, one thing I want to do before the next video, this is not going to be Adam, it's a different source this time, is to kind of remind ourselves or talk briefly. This is not at all a math-heavy session, but this one piece here I do want to cover, just because covering this ahead of time will hopefully help us see this next video that's going to be about interpreting a pump curve and understanding what he's got and how his number on the curve proves to be valid mathematically if we work it. Now so our formula is our brake horsepower, which is going to take into consideration lost efficiency at our pump, is equivalent to our flow at our pump in gallons per minute times total dynamic head. I always say that's just a fancy way to say the total lift of water from where it's pulled up from our well, if it's a well, or our intake at our surface water plant, up into our well house or our treatment plant, out into our distribution system, and to the highest elevation we have to send that water to fill our storage tanks. So that's total dynamic head, total lift of the water, divided by 3960. 3960 is a number that we get from, in water, it's our water number conversion for horsepower is what that is, times our pump efficiency, a decimal point number that represents efficiency. So in the example on the video we're about to watch, the gentleman is using a high monster kind of flow compared to what we might be used to in our systems. 10,500 gallons per minute flow. And he's got 60 feet of total dynamic head. We're going to divide that by 3960 times 85% efficiency is where he's showing his pump. So, Michael, do you want to do that again, or does someone else want to do that? If you take 10,500 times 60, divide it by 3960, divided by 0.85. That's the way you can do it all in one step without multiplying this, and then dividing that into it. Let's see what kind of answer we get there.
I don't know, 135?
135, where did you take 10,500 times 60?
Times 60,
Divide by 3960?
and then times 85% efficiency.
That one you're going to have to say divide by. So can you go back and divide that out? What I do when I'm teaching classes, I usually will multiply those two numbers. I'll multiply these two numbers, and then I'll take this answer, divide it into this answer.
So 10,500
Yep, times 60.
times 60,
Divide by 3960.
divide by 39.
60. Divide by 0.85.
187.
187, okay, that sounds right to me. So let's see if we can, if I can click that now, it just sends me to the next slide. I have to get out of it to do it.
Here we have a pump characteristic curve showing head and feet and pump efficiency versus the capacity in thousands of gallons per minute. So looking at the pump curve for a specific or a particular impeller, the head curve shows feet of head for a given flow rate. We also need to put the efficiency curve for that impeller. So efficiency is the pump efficiency for a given flow rate. So this shows you the efficiency of the pump versus head for a given flow rate. And you can see that we have the peak efficiency point right at the top of the efficiency curve. If we come down from that peak efficiency point to where it intersects the head curve, we can find that best efficiency point, the BEP. The best efficiency point is the flow at which the pump operates at the highest or optimum efficiency for a given impeller diameter. If we come across to the left from that point, we see that that head is about 60 feet. If we come down from that point, we can see that the flow at 60 psi is approximately 10,500 gallons per minute. Now if we put the brake horsepower curve on here, we can see the power requirements. Brake horsepower is the power required from the motor to drive the pump at a given head to deliver a given volumetric flow rate. If we draw a line over from the brake horsepower curve from where the flow rate intersects the brake horsepower curve, we see that this requires about 200 horsepower.
Just under, really. 180.
Now we want to take a look at the difference between series operation and parallel operation. When pumps are in series operation, where one pump discharges into the suction of another, what we see is an increase in head, but no increase in flow rate. So series operation will increase the pressure or increase the head, but it will not increase the volumetric flow rate. And here we can see the difference in head. So series operation increases head without increasing the volumetric flow rate. Well, in parallel operation, if we have one pump with its curve displayed here, if we added a second identical pump, the curve would look like this. And what we see with parallel operation is that we have an increase in the volumetric flow rate without increasing the head.
Okay, so a couple of things there. I was showing that basically, even though he didn't use the reference to that exact number, 187, his line was just under 200. It was 187 is how you figure that mathematically. So I liked it because that was a somewhat basic pump curve. I mean, those pump curves get so complicated. The other thing I liked about the ending part there is he was demonstrating how if you have two pumps in series of the same capacity or in line, the same line, one upstream from the other one that's downstream, one pumping into the suction of the second one, what you're doing is increasing discharge head or the ability to lift the water higher without increasing necessarily any or much noticeable volume in output in terms of gallons per minute flow. When you've got two pumps in parallel operation, presumably in separate lines going out, then you can increase the volume. So in series, the same as pumps or impeller, multiple impellers in series, you increase the discharge. I did like it. He was kind of explaining that. So net positive suction head is the available pressure of at suction head, pressure at suction head, and the minimum pressure that's required at suction head. If a pump is starved of net positive suction head, what would happen? What would happen? We've heard this word, I think, one time in a presentation.
Cavitation.
Cavitation, right? If it's starved of net positive suction head, and that is because, as we were talking earlier, you take a line or you take an intake stream that's pulling water and you clog it partially. Maybe a calcified buildup because of hard water. Maybe you have iron bacteria because you have a lot of iron in your water. and that gets on there and clogs that screen. So now you can't pull through all of its openings. It's choked down to the rest of it. What happens is when it's choked down, it's increasing the velocity. Just like if you were choking down a flow because of scale in a line or a reduction of pipe size, it's increasing the velocity through that pump, and that's increasing the agitation of the water, which increases the oxygen or the air that's trapped in the water. And those air bubbles are what are destructive and implode or collapse on themselves and cause destruction. So that's what that is really kind of talking about there. And this is an excellent demonstration of cavitation. We're going to look at this demonstration of cavitation, then we're going to take a 15-minute break. Okay, this is really in line with this concept here.
Here we have a pump trainer. We have an electric motor with a horsepower meter through a magnetic coupling to a centrifugal pump. The pump itself is made of acrylic, so we can see the spinning impeller inside. We can also see the fluid go through. It's got a gate valve here to discharge. It's got another valve over here on the suction. And all the piping here is clear, so we can watch the flow of fluid. But right now it's all clear water, so we can't see much in that regard. It's got a rotometer here showing us the amount of flow. What I'm going to demonstrate here is cavitation. We're going to purposely cause cavitation to occur in the system. We're going to do so by keeping the discharge valve wide open like it is and pinching off the suction valve. What that will do is reduce the pressure of this line, and you'll see this compound gauge show a stronger and stronger vacuum as we begin to pinch off this valve. Now start to turn this clockwise, and you will see the gauge's indication go down. You'll also begin to hear cavitation take effect. We'll be able to see the bubbles form inside of here as it cavitates after it flashes the vapor and cavitates into liquid again here. So here we go, closing the valve. And watching the gauge. Gauge will go down. Minus 10 inches of mercury. Minus 12. Minus 14, you can start to hear a flashing curve there. 16, more noise. Minus 18, minus 20. You start to hear that sound sounds almost like rocks going through the pipe. There's no debris, there's no solid material through here. That solid sounding sound is really the collapsing of the vapor bubbles as they go back to the liquid form. You can really hear it now. You can see it occur inside of here. It's a very pronounced action and noise. As the water goes through the valve, it reduces pressure going through the restricted valve. This pressure drops below the vapor point of the water at this temperature. It flashes into steam, and then after it comes out of the valve and it stands again, the pressure goes up, and what happens is those vapor bubbles collapse back into liquid. And that's where you get the cavitation effect. You can see it happening here. We can also see some bubbles here at the spool casing of the pump. Cavitation is very destructive, especially upon metal surfaces. The acrylic surfaces here seem to handle it a little bit better, but the metal surfaces is okay, and very destructive. The metal will become pitted by the high pressure jets formed by the collapsing bubbles. So I just want to illustrate what cavitation looks like in an acrylic tube and what it sounds like. It sounds like rocks, literally like rocks going through the pipe. And again, we cause it by dropping too low of a pressure, causing flashing to occur. So when the pressure rises again, the bubbles collapse. That's when cavitation occurs. I will open this valve back up. That increases the pressure on the suction side of the pump, less and less vacuum, until we no longer flash and we no longer cavitate. And that's a happy pump.
So while he choked down that suction valve, that's the same as choking off the intake that I have in calcified buildup or iron bacteria on that. I've got exactly 10:15. Why don't we take a 15-minute break? I'll get us back to it. So, still talking about pumps. What happens, of course, a pump will start up abruptly, full force. What's one of the big problems we have with that? All right, water hammer, good. So it can cause a lot of damage in our lines. And protections we have, this is a control box for one protection. That would be a soft start. What's another control to help protect against water heating?
Some kind of cushion, air cushion,
Air cushion,
maybe a bladder tank to soften the blow.
okay. There are tanks like that you can position in places where you expect water hammer might happen that are kind of like, I consider like a shock absorber. So that is an alternative. Does anybody have any of those in place? Anything else? What else do you have? What about variable frequency drives? Variable frequency drives, maybe? Now, soft start is good because it'll slowly ramp up the voltage. This does it over a period of almost 3 minutes and slowly ramp it down. So when the pump's starting and stopping, you don't get that sudden jolt and the damage that you can get from that. Variable frequency drives are good because they can do that too, and they can sustain lower flow for lower demand times or ramp up to higher flow for higher demands. So they are more adaptable that way, whereas this gives you a constant flow, but it just gently eases into it and then gently shuts down at the end of the cycle, but it doesn't change the output of the pump. So water hammer, I usually separate these out as 3 distinct issues. They all have problems with destruction in lines. Water hammer, I always think of forward motion, that opening a valve too quickly or that pump kicks on full throttle, and it can do damage, usually to a valve that's closed or partially closed downstream, maybe a bend in the line. Surge, a little different in that surge at high areas of a line, air tends to collect in high areas. And air is compressible where water is not compressible. So if air is in this higher area of this line and all of a sudden a valve is shut abruptly, or a pump stops abruptly, that water continues to move at first in the direction of the force that was sending it, and then it stops and it starts coming back, back up. It's like a push hard and it comes back, springs back. It meets up with any air that collects in that upper area and it compresses it, and that then expands back out, sends that water rippling back, and you get these what are called oscillating wave actions, which cause shock in the line, and they can jimmy the line and cause connections between lines, joints to separate, or even bust lines from the force. And thrust is similar in that where you have a change in directional flow, maybe because of a fire that's being fought, and you've got hydrants open, pulling the water a different direction, or all of a sudden a change in velocity, that too, from a fire or from a water main break, that now shocks the line and jimmies it and causes it to break free from its seal if you've got joints there. So those are destructive problems, and here is another quick video. They're just showing a little bit about that shock wave motion in a line with this quick demonstration on hammer, water hammer.
So we are going to do a water hammer demonstration where I'm going to do a quick close of the valve with the air vents off on a 100-foot PVC and steel pipeline. Now on the steel pipe, and now I'm going to turn the air vents off. Now I'm going to close the air vent again, show you where the water air separation occurs.
Okay, so just quick, kind of shows the shock on the line there. And it also brings back that concept of, in addition to the destructive nature of that shock, it also, by introducing agitation into the line, you're increasing the potentially introduced air in the line, which just gives you more potential problems downstream because of that compressibility of the air compared to water, which doesn't compress. So sometimes we use certain types of devices out in our lines to try to prevent problems like that, so as to be able to belch the air excess out, kind of like the vertical column she had there on her line, when she'd open them up and let them breathe out the air and belch out a little water too. And if we want to sustain pressure at the same time, we can actually inject potable water into the line to fill that void so that there is no, very little movement back and forth. There's no room to move. Now the air's gone and the void is filled with water. So we have hydrants, two types of hydrants. Move into water. Our hydrants, wet barrel and dry barrel. And of course in Missouri we'll have the dry barrel because they have a leaky opening at the base below ground where they can drain out so that the stem of the hydrant, the main body, is free from holding water and freezing. And then just pictures of some new hydrants on a rack there. Hydrants are really ideally good in a municipal setting where you can install them at every street intersection or corner. Residential places, typically up to 600 feet apart, and then for industrial commercial establishments, they might need them even closer. It depends on their needs for fire suppression. We use hydrants, of course, to flush our lines. Suppress fire, and what is the size that is required at minimum to support fire suppression in a water line? Anybody remember that? It's 6 inch. That comes from the Insurance Service Organization. DNR actually takes a lot of its requirements and standards from different organizations. That one comes from the Insurance Service Organization out of Chicago. They'll take a lot of their standards from American Water Works Association for disinfection and those types of things, clean out of storage tanks. They even take some standards from what's called the 10 state standard rule around the Great Lakes. 10 states have developed their own set of standards, and also from the National Fire Association, they borrowed some information in standards. So open and close, like any valve, hydrants need to be exercised slowly because they can cause water hammer. You want to open and close them slowly. Check drainage, place the palm of your hand over the opening. When you shut off the hydrant, you should be able to feel a little suction to make sure they're adequately draining. Cleaning oil nozzle threads. Paint hydrants, good idea to paint a hydrant every couple of years or so. And then you can use a pitot gauge to test your flows and your pressures, and check your sustainability of pressure when you have hydrants open. How do you normally conduct a pressure test? Who does pressure tests in your system? We're not after lunch, it's not, we didn't eat yet, so I'm not implying that you're tired. Okay, pressure gauge. And you got a pressure gauge. One method would be to open up a hydrant on one end, have a static reading on the pressure, and then downstream, the next hydrant downstream, open that up full, come back, test the pressure on the upstream hydrant. That would be a way to make sure that we haven't dropped drastically out of pressure. That tells us how well can we support fire suppression in our water distribution system. We should be able to with very little loss of pressure when we're doing that. So here we've got a gauge, a diffuser, to help prevent erosion of the ground when we open that hydrant up. The National Fire Protection Association has these codes for the bonnet and nozzle, for flows, and that I don't know how well we adhere to them. We always, MRWA Water Association, we drive all over the state, and drive through towns and see all pretty blue hydrants from top to bottom, or all pretty red ones, or yellow ones sometimes. Sometimes you get creative and paint polka dots on them, but none of those would tell the local fire department what flows they have, unless they have a local code among the water and fire protection agency within a municipality, which they could have potentially. That would vary from this, but typically we would want to follow the National Fire Protection Association for our color coding of bonnet and nozzle to indicate to firefighters what kind of flow they can expect at scene of fire. Flushing, how often would you flush yourself? How often do you guys flush your systems? Twice a year? Okay. Anybody do it once a year? Once a year? Anybody do it more than twice a year? Less than once a year?
Twice a year on dead end mains.
Okay, on dead end mains. Dead ends in city, and you're with the city of St. Louis, and on dead end lines in the city, do you have trouble maintaining, are you on free chlorine in the city or chloramines? Chloramines, so you probably still have a good residual in your dead ends. And do you get discoloration when you're opening up a dead end line, city of St. Louis?
Sometimes, and you let it flush for a couple hours.
Okay. Do you ever have hydrogen sulfide odor or anything like that?
No.
Okay. So when you are flushing, when you're flushing that new hydrant, Mike, what do you encounter? Do you encounter problems, or you just do it as a matter of course that you just, it's part of your routine, or?
It's part of your routine, but you should keep the iron building up. Style the line.
Is the iron because of iron in the water, or is it just a metal pipe?
Real metal pipe.
Old metal pipe. So when you first open it, you get a slug of red water, rusty looking stuff coming out. Okay. All right. In what direction would we flush? We typically want to flush from where? Where do we want to start?
Source.
Okay, from our source, so from our well, or from our water storage tank, or our water treatment plant, our source, and then we're going to work our way slowly in stages out to our far ends of our system. The velocity, now this is a Water Works Association, American Water Works Association standard. What is considered the minimum velocity for flushing? They want to make sure you get a good scouring in the line. You don't just put dirt around, sediment around in the line. It's 2.5 feet per second is the velocity that's minimum. And then on the maximum side, it's 5 feet per second. Flushing stand size should be no less than a couple inches smaller than the main that you're flushing. So if you've got a 4-inch line, you could flush it out with a 2-inch flush out. Probably wouldn't want anything smaller. Before flushing, notify customers, and the concerns would be, why would you want to notify customers?
Brown water.
Okay, brown water, they might see discolored water, and if you don't tell them, they're probably going to be calling and telling you, and they won't be happy when they tell you they got problems with water, okay? Anything else that might be a concern when you're flushing for customers? It might be jeopardizing pressure a little bit. They might see a drop in pressure and wonder what's going on because we're opening lines. And customers, I usually say any customer, when you're flushing, do you do overnight flushing? Or do you do flushing in the daytime? I'm going to talk first about system-wide flushing. When you're doing system-wide flushing, how do you do it? How do you do it in St. Louis?
It flush both.
Both day and at night too, because you got shifts around the clock, right?
Right.
Okay. So what about pneumatic? Do you have 20?
No, we don't have to. Well, we do as far as you don't call it, we do ours at night.
And you do it at night, middle of the night when people are sleeping?
We started at about 10 o'clock, and go about 2 o'clock.
Okay, okay. How about others? What do you guys do over there? Number 4? Today. Okay. Okay, because you also don't have 3 shifts or anything there, so you do it during the day. Okay. All right, so we do flushing for the sake of cleaning out lines through once or twice a year. And then sometimes we also flush because customers complain of color or odor, or maybe even texture. Have you ever had somebody complain about the water feels different than that? Or they see little grit in their bathroom stool, black grit or something? Manganese is what that would be. Manganese, natural mineral, no big deal, but it could build up in a line just like iron. And if the line hasn't turned over much, it could start causing more problems. So flushing downstream or near that customer could help get rid of a buildup, because anything that's just a small amount in the water over time accumulates. It drops out in the line. Just the air in that line will cause those minerals to oxidize out over time, and eventually you get accumulation. So it's good to even do spot flushing to satisfy customers' complaint. Here I've got a design, just a kind of a layout here. We've got water entering our system from a storage tank or a water plant. We've got valves that are, I've got these running crosswise against these white lines. The white lines are the pipes. So these valves are closed. Ideally, to flush the line, you would want to have these valves closed so that you're flushing, bringing that water from that plant or well or storage tank and getting this line good and clean. If you've got all these valves open, and of course if you've got wonderful valving, then it's kind of like an ideal world. we don't always have the valves we need. But if you don't, let's say you don't have a valve here, or you don't have this valve closed, then you're potentially pulling water from over here, from up here. I mean, you could never truly clean this line out. So, I mean, you kind of stall. So then if we were to then open this valve and move here, once again, ideal world, we have all these wonderful valves. These are open. The arrows are running in the direction of the pipe, so they are open valves. We would want, ideally, have that one valve open, these closed, and these closed, so that now we can flush here and bring this clean water down here in that. But I mean, that's really talking about an ideal world where you have enough valves, enough staffing, where you can do this all the way through your system and carrying that clean water to the far end. We tend to not do what I would call the book, by the book, system-wide flushing. We tend to do what's going to more likely be spot flushing. We might flush every flush out or every hydrant in our system, every segment of line, but if we're not adequately isolating those other joining lines, it's a type of spot flushing. It belching out some water that maybe has sat in there for a while, but not necessarily is it pulling the line. Say I have a flush out here, and I do the flush with no regard about isolating lines, the joining lines. Well, then my flush pulling water from all directions. So I might be getting rid of some red-looking water or water that smells like hydrogen sulfide, rotten eggs, but I'm not necessarily really scouring out those lines, trying to break through any tuberculized buildup in the line and get it expelled. When's the best time to flush, below water demands, and I talked about spot flushing already. And this is just an image that will probably be very familiar for you. Pretty high velocity flush.
There it is, here it comes.
Why you don't flush in the daytime? Customers might be a little concerned if they saw that come out of their water. Clear up. So, yeah, you bring up a good point. In my previous class with this, the last time I did this was in February, and I'd forgotten that someone mentioned the very point you made is that's why you don't flush during the daytime, because customers would be really alarmed if they thought that all that nasty stuff was in their drinking water lines, going to belch it out. And when you flush and it goes clear, does that mean it stays clear? Does that mean you actually got it all? I don't know.
Better wait, you're gonna get the second one.
You're going to get a second slug of that?
Good clear water for 2-3 minutes and you're gonna get that second slug. If you don't get it out, it's gonna drive you nuts for 2 weeks trying to find it.
Is that right?
If it's at your house today, it's gonna be somewhere else tomorrow. And they don't ever call when it's there. They call and say, yeah, it was pretty brown about 4 hours ago.
Oh, is that right? So then you
Yeah, then you gotta go try to track it down.
because now it's moved on, hasn't it? It's kind of like a monster, moved on. Yeah, and if they were leaving their faucet open long enough to try to flush it, it would take forever to get that kind of volume out of a faucet or whatever, or it could cause problems with laundry if it's pulled in and cause discoloration of their clothes or whatever, ruin their clothes. Anybody ever had customers saying, hey, you ruined my laundry? I've heard that before from some operators saying they've had customers upset about it. So water loss, we'll move into a little bit about water loss. Breaks down into several categories. This is a way the American Water Works Association addresses water loss. It's a little more sophisticated than the way I have looked at water loss in the past, to be honest. There's revenue generating water, there's non-revenue generating water, there's apparent loss and real loss. Now that apparent loss is the one that I never gave thought to. It was kind of incorporated without a label into what I was considering. I don't think I was failing to take it into account. I just didn't have something I labeled as apparent loss. So we'll look at some things that are apparent loss. So revenue generating water, what would be examples of revenue generating water?
So,
Good, the water you're selling. Hopefully it is the majority of the water you're producing at your wells and treatment plants sending to your customers. The water you're selling. The water you're selling through your meters, and do you ever sell water in any other capacity for any other reason? What do you sell it for?
To the boats on the river.
The boats on the river, okay. So you have to pull up, they want to fill up there, okay. Is that you're talking about the barges, or you're talking about little private boats?
The core boats, American Queen, all those, which it is metered now. It wasn't metered now.
Is that a lot of water, Mike?
It can be over to 70,000 gallons.
In a year's time,
Oh,
a month? One filling? One filling? Oh,
It
okay.
can get anywhere from 30 to 70,000 gallons, depending on, they were allowed to stop, up or down. Hey, I'm sure you fill them up, too, don't you? You know, I fill the boat. I know maybe we miss them or we can't, for whatever reason, they come cape or down below us.
So you do meter it now, that's,
We do meter it now.
that's good, because that's a lot of California. What about others? Do you supply water for people with swimming pools, having somebody come in and get bulk water?
We have a local volunteer fire department that may get water from our tower.
Okay.
That's probably.
And do you know how much they can carry in their tanker or whatever?
I'm guessing probably 500 gallons, whatever the truck will hold.
Okay, so you can know just based on their capacity what they're getting from you, even if it's not metered right there. Okay, good. So those are our primary methods. I remember also when I worked at the city of Fredericktown, they were doing the expansion of Highway 67 going south, and at our city of Fredericktown, Cherokee Pass area, I remember the contractors had to come in and get water too. They needed water, and I had sometimes well drillers coming in. They needed water for their drilling process, so they would buy water, sometimes bulk water from us. It seemed like, oh yeah, they were doing land reclamation. EPA was, because of lead in the dirt, and in order to remove the dirt safely and not release it into the air, they had to make dirt mud. So they needed water to sprinkle on the lawns before they removed the dirt, or otherwise it would basically be, the lead would be airborne and it would just resettle somewhere else. So they would kind of be defeating their own purpose. But all of those were means of selling bulk water to contractors, basically. Non-revenue generating water, what are examples of non revenue generating water? What do you deliberately use that doesn't give you money?
Flushing, line breaks, leaks.
Okay. Flushing, and line breaks, so the leaks are in there. And the word deliberately might not fit the leak part, but okay, but you do use it and you know it's used, and that's a good example of it. All right, so flushing and leaks.
Treatment plant basin cleaning and that sort of thing.
Okay, treatment plants need cleaning. You clean out sludge from basins, and when we're at the treatment plant, we could extend that to say water carrying lines. If you're using chlorine gas, you need a water carrying line to pull a vacuum to pull the gas. That's water usage. Well, we have water lines and 1-inch lines at my surface water treatment plant to have each of we have about 9 different chemicals injected into a 1-inch water line. Each had a 1-inch water line going, and so that was a lot of water that was used internally at the water plant that came from our clear well, didn't go necessarily through our master meter out of the water plant. So there was this production water that was used internally instead of sending it out to the town. So that's a good use of it. If you live in a municipality, who else uses your water in the municipality that might?
Fire department.
Okay, the fire department, and even out in rural district areas, sometimes maybe you get that. Certainly in the municipality, the fire department for firefighting and also training fire staff, firefighters. What about the street department? We didn't have much in the way of bad weather this past winter, but usually when they know there's a snow or an ice storm or something coming, or a little sleet coming, you see them out there, or you might not see them, but you drive down the road and you see these little tracks in the road that are that brine that they put down to help melt that ice that they're anticipating coming. Well, that's water, potable water they use for that. And also when the street sweepers, they'll use water when they're cleaning up the streets. So there's some potable water for those things. Have you ever deliberately overflowed your water storage tank because you thought it was maybe stagnating a little bit? Even in a chlorinated or monochlorinated system, we're talking thermal stratification occurs. Warm water rises to the top, just like warm air rises to the top. And in those systems, the older water is the warmer water, because imagine in the heat of summer, the sun's beating down on those steel tanks and warming that water. So the older the water is, the longer it's been exposed to that sunlight, the more it's likely to settle on the top and not be pulled out when your customers are using it. And that water is a veritable, I say, incubator for cold form. Even in a disinfected system, it dissipates that disinfectant eventually. And sometimes it's good, especially if you're in a non-disinfected system, because some of our smaller systems don't disinfect, to really overflow a tank in the heat of summer, just to ward against potential cold form positive samples when you're taking your monthly samples. So that is something. In a treatment plant, filter backwashing, that's another process that uses high volumes water. So those are some of the many things that we would talk about that are non-revenue generating. I didn't mention this, but in the city, in a municipality, and this might be true for the municipalities, I don't know how it works for each of the towns, but the city hall, the police department, fire department, parks and recreation, the street department, solid sanitation, the clean water side, any department I failed to mention, all of those different departments and their multiple facilities, because the distribution crew might have a separate building where it stores spare pipe and parts and tools, heavy equipment. all of those different facilities owned by the municipality probably get their water free of charge. And maybe even in a district, you have more than one facility, and your district office might not pay its water bill, right? If your customers only knew you guys didn't pay your water bill. So free water, but at least you can account for it. If you meter it, you know what water there is. Now, apparent loss is, again, this label I never assigned, this American Water Works Association way of talking about water loss, where you have a check valve that fails and the master meter then turns backwards, which would suggest we had less water pumped than we really did have. You know, then we might falsely estimate our water production. Our master meter overreads, and that could suggest a leak. I'll tell you what happened. We had terribly outdated meters in my system. I was in charge of the water treatment plant, not the distribution system, where those meters were. Those old doggone meters, residential meters, that underread terribly. Or at least I assume they underread terribly. Old meters. A lot of scale buildup on them, mineral deposits through the years. Well, I couldn't have bragging rights because at the surface water plant, my mechanical master meter finally bit the dust because it had a lot of mineral buildup too. So lo and behold, I didn't know this until I got a new master meter, and all of a sudden my water loss shot way up. Oh, we've been understating our water production at the water plant all these years. But the one thing about it was our water production is really here. We thought it was down here, but with all those old residential meters, our water loss seemed manageable. Once my master meter started reading honestly, it looked like, wow, we have a lot of lost water, which is really a lot of outdated meters that are under registering is what it was. So that was an eye opener for me. All of a sudden we went to really big numbers on our water loss. This calculation of water production or consumption, just doing the math wrong, if you're doing meter reading or if somebody at the office is inputting numbers incorrectly. Improperly sized meters. Meters need to be one size smaller typically than the line they're on. Mike, you gave an example of if you're on a 3/4 inch line comes in through a 5/8 inch meter. That's the proper installation there. But I've seen it the other way around. I've seen a 3/4 inch line with a 1 inch residential meter. Had a system that had horribly high, I'm talking 40% water loss. Well, it could be those 1 inch meters you're spending more on than a 5/8 inch meter are giving you less money back because they're oversized. So we want to think about that. So under registering meters, just from the fact that they get wear on them, old wear, improper or pump inefficiency when the operator believes it pumps more than it actually does, and theft is another apparent loss. So those are apparent losses. Real loss, what really is lost, the stuff we really can't account for, the unknown, where did it go water, is we just have no idea where it is, unknown theft of water. I just had theft on apparent loss. Theft, if we suspect theft, we can maybe account for how much we think is being stolen. That's apparent loss. But if we don't know it's happening, that would be this real loss. It's not even something we're estimating because we don't even have it on our radar. It's just unknown to us. And undiscovered leaks. And I really should have up there unconsidered under-registering meters. If you're not thinking about the meters as giving us too little water, or too little revenue for the water sending to customers. If we don't have that on our radar, that would be, I would say, real loss as well. So calculating water loss. So what would be a simple, I said it's not a math heavy, and we're not going to actually crunch numbers, but just tell me what the process is on calculating water loss. What do you do? How do you calculate water loss?
Calculate all your meter readings and go against what your water pump shows as your wells. Calculate up all salt water and combine the two and should show you difference.
Good, okay, excellent. So all of the water you pumped on your master meter, or master meters, if you've got multiple wells or other facilities that are pumping water, and then all your metered customers' volume added together, plus if you sold any in bulk or any other stuff,
Yeah, anything like that.
all of that you're accounting for added together, and subtract that from what your master meters tell you, right? And that amount then is what's the unknown loss. So we take this unknown loss and we divide it by what we produced, the total amount our master meters produced, and that'll give us the percent loss. Excellent, that's exactly what you would do to figure that. That's excellent way to do it. So even with all the highfalutin language that American Water Works Association uses, and they have a fancy spreadsheet to work through water loss, and I've worked it and I honestly thought, this is kind of bogus. In the end, this is what you want to do. So yeah, they added this category that they're calling apparent loss. I understand that because that's somewhere in the unknown, but we have it in our suspicion that there is some water going here for theft, some water going over here for loss, efficiency on meters, and we're kind of incorporating that in, and we're going to call that, according to the American Water Works Association, we're going to call that the suspected loss or the presumed loss or whatever they call it. But in the end, their spreadsheet gives multiple pages of here's what you need to do to the customer. It's kind of a recommendation for customers. Here's what you need to do, or here's what the water system needs to do. Well, it's kind of obvious, you know. If you got a lot of under-registering meters, well, you need to probably think about replacing the meters. So it kind of comes to what I'd consider silly, obvious conclusions. So in the end, it really is about that formula, trying to just determine what is your loss of water. So we'll move into positive displacement pumps, the different types of positive displacement pumps, reciprocating pumps. That means there's an action that goes forward and backwards or up and down over and over, a repeating action over and over, or up and down if it's a piston or a plunger. And then rotary, where we're turning 360 degrees on a rotor, a screw-threaded type pump like a progressive cavity pump or a peristaltic pump. So everybody in here injects chemicals, right? Does anybody not treat your water? Okay, everybody treats. So what kind of chemical feed pumps do you use? Do you use, usually these, what we see in the field are the old LMIs. That's what we used extensively at City Fredericktown, those yellow-black pumps.
I think we use a diaphragm.
Okay,
A little rubber diaphragm back and forth.
okay, good.
Moves real slow.
And does it have two settings on it? Two, or one knob?
One knob.
One knob,
Percentage, how much you put in, inject in.
okay.
Per minute, I guess.
I've seen those two, but what kind I work with had the two knobs, one for speed, one for stroke, and basically it's like, you know, it is a back and forth kind of an action with the diaphragm, or piston would be the same kind of concept. So if we were to increase the speed, you know, we can go way up, or we can go slower, or we can go slow, and then the stroke is what slug do we pull of chemical with each forward and backward motion or up and down motion, you know, how big a slug, you know, if I want a bigger percent, so then I can speed that up. That's the reciprocating back and forth, just like a reciprocating saw. You know, a sawzall out there, if you use a sawzall to chop, cut through pipe, however. So that's reciprocating. Now, on the ones that just have one knob, some of them are just a digital display where you're doing a percent of the pump's capacity. So if the pump can produce 100 gallons a day, you bring it down to 50%. We're talking 50 gallons a day kind of thing, you know. You can set it based on that. They're usually rated in gallons per minute or gallons per day. GPD is more frequent, I think, that I found on pumps than anything gallons per day. So then the rotary, the rest of you are using, I'm guessing, peristaltic pump, where you've got a cam and you've got two rollers that turn and pinch this little tube, pull a slug of chemical up through the tube. Is that, you're shaking your head yes, you've got those? Everybody using those? And I'll mention from down here in southeast Missouri, I was at a system where they used the peristaltic pump, and the operator said, it was an education for me. I didn't know about this little hard piece of plastic that wraps around like a gasket or an O-ring almost under the dial that you adjust, usually from 0 to 10 adjustment on those peristaltic pumps. And what he told me is, he said, for a while, I thought after I set my pump for my sodium hypochlorite injection that the other operator, there's another operator at the water plant, he was coming in behind me and turning that up, because I'd come in the next day and it was up higher, and I asked him about it and he said, no, I didn't touch it. So I shrugged my shoulder and I just went back to my setting that I had, and he said, I came in the next day and it was up again. He said, I started thinking I had a ghost here because the pump kept adjusting up and it would change my setting up higher. And he said, then he contacted, I believe it was Hawkins, that sold him the pump, and they said, well, if you go behind the dial or the adjustment, you will find a piece of plastic or nylon or whatever that wraps around. It's supposed to go all the way around. And it's supposed to just be a flat tube. It has a raised section here, and that got warped. And in that warping, it somehow adjusts with a little vibration, adjusts that pump dial, and he could never keep it straight. So he thought, you know, I'm going to have to replace the pump. In the end, because of discovering this, and again, I didn't know anything about this little dealy-wop, he was able to discover how he could just make the pump stay where I put it, like a dog training. I'll just pass that around. I kept it in there because it had a little grime on it, threw it in a little baggie for you to see, but thought it'd be kind of interesting to just tell you about what can happen with those pumps. So there's one of those Elamonic reciprocating pumps, got the speed and the stroke setting there for adjustment. Again, some of them have just a single dial. This is a really bad picture, or it's a really good picture of heavily corroded parts, but this is a progressive cavity pump where the rotor goes through a rubber stator, it's called, and threads through and kind of forces chemical solution through in a rotary way. This is a huge monster 3-inch peristaltic pump. It's got this 3-inch in it, and I don't know if the image shows up real well. It's got the cam, and it's got these big steel rollers on the end here, coming from one end to here, and it's pinching this 3-inch rubber hose down. It's horribly big and not a very good application for that. I think that pump is too big for its britches. I think what they should have done is said, no, it won't really work very well at that size. We shouldn't make them this big. But anyway, they made them this big, and they sold them, and they didn't last long, but that's how that can work. So characteristics of positive displacement pumps, they send a specific discharge with each pulse. That's what makes them positive discharge. We can set them and we can determine ahead what they will discharge. They're considered self-priming. Now that LMI pump I showed you up there, if I have that suction line down in a day tank or in a carboy of solution or a drum, I can crank them up 100% speed, 100% stroke, and really work that hard of that little pump, and it will pull a slug of solution up and in and through. The only time that didn't work was with hydrofluorosilicic acid, my fluoride. That doggone thing needed, I'm going to say, mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, but not really. I wouldn't dare put my mouth on that. But it needed a lot of TLC and about a half day of hassle when it lost its prime, that little pump. So if you had success at self-priming, when you put the foot valve, the suction line down in another drum, or you put in a new pump, that work okay for you easily? Priming, okay, I'm seeing heads shake yes. Anybody have trouble with it? One thing I have seen is, and even helping small systems when they're setting up sodium hypochlorite pump, maybe for the first time, trying to figure this out. They've never done this before. Now all of a sudden DNR says they gotta start doing it. How to get that thing primed, and I've had trouble with it wanting to prime, even pulling up all the way full. Even a little peristaltic pump, which theoretically should just pull that slug up too, all the way through. And what I tend to do is, remember, air settles to high areas. So I take that little tube and I will snake it down, and I'll get a little area of high spot where the air will collect, because it gets airlocked, those little air bubbles in there. And you gotta get those doggone air bubbles out of that line. And then I'll take it from there and I'll go up and snake it again. And I'll keep working the high spot downstream on that little discharge tube, working those air bubbles slowly out to evacuate them out of that line, and then take that line and screw it into the injection point. And that's how I have found I can get the pump to finally produce a solution instead of just pretend it had a heartbeat, because the pump will just turn, or one of those LMI pumps will just keep on pulsing like they're working for you, but they're not doing anything. They just got an airlock and they're not doing anything. So you got to be careful about that. Destructive forces, what would destroy one of those positive displacement pumps? What's considered really hard on a little chemical pump?
Running against a closed valve.
Good, running against a closed valve, exactly. But we don't want to do that. And the reason you don't want to do it, because they are troopers. Those pumps will give their life for you. They will give their all. They will just keep on and keep on and keep on pumping until they finally can't anymore, and they die in the cause of trying to send some solution or fluid forward, and they won't. So yeah, we don't want to destroy the pumps.
I remember that before, I just remembered that.
Oh, not a personal experience, huh? Okay. I'm glad you clarified that, Barry, so we don't make any false assumptions about that. Other designs. Oh yeah, I think this is Adam come back to us again for maybe his last video for the day. This is interesting because, we talk about some real simplified, basic style pumps, mostly in a certification class to prepare you for those questions you might encounter on an exam. But here, Adam actually talks about other designs that I haven't really encountered, but maybe you've seen in applications at places. Cook it.
Hi, I'm Adam.
This is the Machine Take video blog, and today I'd like to talk a little bit about the different types of positive displacement pumps.
Have to turn it down, that's a nice problem today to have.
At first glance, there seem to be so many unique designs of positive displacement pump that it can be a little confusing. And it really wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to try and cover every single possibility in this one video. But what I have tried to do is to break it down into 9 basic mechanisms. At the heart of any pump, you'll find one of these mechanisms. I've also tried to show a real-world example of each different type of pump. Each basic mechanism falls within one of 2 categories based on what type of motion it utilizes. We have reciprocating and we have rotary. Reciprocating pumps are the first category. Every reciprocating pump utilizes some kind of expanding and contracting chamber and a series of check valves in order to draw fluid into the pump and then direct it out into the system. To illustrate this concept, let's take a look at pump number 1, the piston pump. The mechanism consists of a reciprocating piston inside of a cylinder with check valves at both the inlet and the outlet. When the piston is on its suction stroke, which is the upstroke in this case, the chamber inside of the cylinder expands. The pressure drops, the check valve on the suction side opens, and fluid is admitted through the inlet. By definition, check valves permit flow in one direction only, so they help to prevent backflow and direct the fluid through the pump. As the valve on the suction side of the pump opens, the valve on the discharge side closes. On the discharge stroke, which is the downstroke here, the piston pushes on the fluid in the cylinder. The pressure rises. The suction valve now closes, and the discharge valve opens to release fluid into the system. Here's an example of a common piston pump called an axial piston pump. This pump is a tad more complex than our little demonstration, but the pumping action is generated in exactly the same way. The axial piston pump has multiple pistons equally spaced on the end of a rotating angled plate. As the plate rotates, the pistons are driven into and out of their respective cylinders. You can clearly see the motion here. Like most reciprocating pumps, piston pumps are relatively efficient, and they're capable of generating very high pressures. Pump number 2 is the plunger pump. Plunger pumps look very similar to piston pumps, but they work a little differently. Unlike a tight-fitting piston, a plunger fits loosely in its cylinder. Just like when your bathtub overflows because you filled it too full with water before jumping in, the physical mass of the plunger alters the size of the chamber and displaces the fluid. This is a triplex plunger pump, which uses 3 staggered plungers for smoother flow delivery, but it is otherwise the same as our demonstration. Pump number 3 is the diaphragm pump. Unlike a piston or a plunger, an elastomer diaphragm is flexible. When it flexes, it changes the volume of the chamber, causing fluid to be drawn into or pushed out of the chamber. Our example is an air-powered double diaphragm pump. The pump is essentially 2 diaphragm pumps oriented back-to-back with the diaphragms linked by a connecting rod, so it can pump on both strokes. One unique property of the diaphragm pump is that it doesn't require a seal, because the wet and dry sections of the pump are completely separated by the diaphragm itself. The second category of positive displacement pump is the rotary pump. All rotary pumps utilize some kind of a moving chamber that traps fluid and carries it from one side of the pump to the other side. To illustrate this concept, Let's look at pump number 4, the gear pump. Actually, this configuration is more properly called an external gear pump. The mechanism consists of 2 rotating gears, one driving the other, inside of an oval housing. At the suction inlet, fluid is trapped in a chamber between the gear teeth and the inside wall of the housing. The rotary motion moves the chamber from one side of the housing to the other side, and as the gear teeth rotate back into mesh, the chamber is closed, forcing the fluid through the discharge outlet. Another configuration of the gear mechanism is the internal gear pump. In this type of pump, an outer gear in a circular housing drives an offset inner gear. The gears are separated by a crescent. Fluid is trapped in one of 2 moving chambers, between the inner gear and the crescent, or between the outer gear and the crescent. As with the external gear pump, the rotary motion moves the chamber from one side of the housing to the other side, and as the gear teeth rotate back into mesh, the chamber is closed, forcing the fluid through the discharge outlet. Pump number 5 is the lobe pump. Lobe pumps function very similarly to external gear pumps, but the rotors are driven independently by external timing gears. The rotors have 2 or more lobes, and the moving chamber is formed between the outer surfaces of the lobes and the inside wall of the oval housing. As one of the lobes rotates back toward the center of the housing, the tight clearance between the lobe and the other rotor closes the chamber and forces the fluid through the discharge outlet. Pump number 6 is the vane pump. A vane pump rotor has slots in it for sliding vanes. Centrifugal force flings the vanes out to contact the inside wall of the circular housing, forming a sealed chamber. Since the rotor is offset in the housing, the vanes extend and retract during rotation. The chamber increases in size at the suction inlet, drawing fluid in. At the discharge outlet, the chamber decreases in size, pushing fluid out. The nice thing about vane pumps is that they automatically compensate for wear, because the vanes are constantly forced against the wall of the housing. Pump number 7 is the peristaltic pump. Peristaltic pumps contain fluid within a flexible hose. The hose is pinched between the rollers and the inside wall of the housing. As the rollers revolve around the center axis, they squeeze the fluid like a tube of toothpaste and move it through the housing to the discharge outlet. As with diaphragm pumps, peristaltic pumps do not require a seal because the fluid is completely contained inside the hose. They really excel at pumping high viscosity fluids with very large solids. I've even seen them pump whole cherries without significantly damaging them. Pump number 8 is the screw pump. Screw pumps can have a single shaft with large threads on it, but they usually have 2 or 3. The center shaft drives the other shafts, like a screw or a worm gear. As the shafts rotate in the housing, fluid trapped in the gaps between the screw threads progresses along the length of the housing and is delivered to the discharge outlet. If you've ever seen an auger or a screw conveyor, this is pretty much the same thing. Our final pump is pump number 9, the progressive cavity pump. These bizarre little pumps may look somewhat like screw pumps, but they function differently. The rotor is shaped like a helix, and the housing is molded into the shape of a double helix. As the rotor rotates and oscillates inside of the housing, it forms a cavity which progresses along the length of the housing. Any fluid trapped in this progressing cavity is delivered to the discharge outlet. Well, there's your introduction to the various different mechanisms that make up the positive displacement pumps. And that's it for today from the Machine Tech video blog. I hope you learned something.
All right, well, I'm going to say that was innovation. By the time I achieved, if I was the inventor, moving fluid from point A to point B, I'd say we've done it. But look at all the designs of pumps, all the ways we can deliver fluid, all the different technology used. It always fascinates me to think of how many different types of styles and designs there are of that. for that purpose. All right, we'll move on to another topic, cross-connection. Cross-connection. I think what we'll do is I'm going to plan to have us break for lunch about 11:45. Does that sound good? 11:45? Maybe get just a slight jump on the rush, and then we'll get back. Maybe we should get back at 1:45 then, if we can do that, okay? We can't get an hour in for lunch. Cross connection. So what's that definition of cross connections? What are we doing when we have a cross connection?
Two different fluids come together.
Good. Two different fluids come together. Perfectly said. One is potable water that we deem as safe to drink, and the other is questionable, maybe good, maybe not, questionable source of water. Contaminant entry. We have backflow, water forces its way back into the main. Typically that would be when the customer has pressure that exceeds the pressure in our distribution lines. Anytime you boil water, you increase the pressure on the water. So any commercial establishment that has a boiler could potentially have higher pressure than we have in our system. That's kind of the reason for DNR's number of 20 PSI, not actually DNR's number, it comes from another source, American Water Works Association, but that minimum 20 PSI pressure we should have to be able to override competing pressures from customers. Let's see, I think I already answered my own question about pressure from a customer flowing back. Back siphonage is water pulled back into the main, as in a reverse flow, as in a negative pressure. What would possibly cause this to happen?
Break.
Okay, a break, right? Water goes the path of least resistance. Now we have a break, so this water that was going downstream in our line now all of a sudden reverses and goes out in this flow through a water line break. Or, again, opening a hydrant, we're flushing, we're pulling water back. We could potentially pull at such force that we actually pull water out of our distribution connections to our services, I should say, to our homes and businesses, and potentially introduce contaminants into our line. So acceptable preventions are for class 1. First of all, what's a class 1 hazard? What does that mean? What kind of threat does that pose? You remember nap time's at 1 o'clock.
Severe.
What's that?
Severe.
Severe. One that is personal. One that is potential harm to humans. Health risk to humans. Exactly. What preventive measures are acceptable? There are a couple of methods to prevent or protect against this. What would be, what's one?
RPZ.
Okay, good. RPZ, a reduced pressure principal backflow prevention device, or RPZ, sometimes we just say RP. It is one method for protecting against this, and there's another method. Air gap, right. Every faucet, for the most part, in your home and in businesses is an air gap, where the termination point for the water discharge is above the overflow rim of the receiving receptacle, which is usually a sink. It's just the sink itself, so that if the sink were stopped up with debris or whatever, and it would come up and it would overflow, but it would never touch that end point for the faucet that delivers our water, so that it's no problem if there's contaminants in that water spilling onto the floor. If we have a garden hose and we connected it to it, and I've seen this in janitor closets, connect the garden hose to it and ran it down into the sink, is that cross connection? All right, I see some nodding heads. Yes, that's a cross connection. Because if that sink were to get backed up with any kind of debris, maybe it's old dirty water from mopping a floor or whatever it is, chemicals, that could get sucked back if we had a main break all of a sudden, get sucked back into our water lines. So that is not considered an acceptable method. There's one thing that is considered in Missouri not acceptable, and that is this pressure vacuum breaker, the nozzle that we have on the end of our garden hose. So typically, because those devices can fail easily and let water get back in the hose and into our lines, if we have a lost pressure, negative pressure in the line from back siphonage, it's recommended that those always be removed in between uses of the garden hose. You know, you hang up the hose or whatever you do, leave the line on the ground, whatever, but you should take those and remove them. So it has to be able to drain the rest of the water out of the hose and not have those devices hold water in. There's an air gap. Air gaps are supposed to be a minimum, absolute minimum of 1 inch separation, but the typical distance is 2 times the diameter of the pipe. So 2 times the diameter of the water discharge minimum, separating the termination point or the bottom of a pipe if it's horizontally installed into, say, a day tank or something, above the overflow rim. Couldn't be installed, I just said it wrong, couldn't be installed into a day tank, right? It couldn't be installed in the wall of a day tank, even if you had a float down here preventing the water from rising, because if that float failed and the water came up, it would not be a physical separation above the flood level rim of the day tank. So that was actually a mistake in the way I worded that. It couldn't be installed could be installed above a day tank for delivering water filled and added with chemical or dilute chemical. Should be above grade, that's normal ground level, so that there's no chance of freezing, water getting in. For one thing, water gets in from rain, melting snow or ice, then we're talking a cross connection. And that also could increase the odds of it freezing and not working too, so that would be a jeopardy to it. And those are to be inspected every year. Alternate prevention is this reduced pressure device, RP or RPZ. It has the double checks with one spring loaded check, stronger and harder to force open than the other. And if the downstream check fails, then the water comes spitting out down here in this, what I call a mechanical air gap in a sense. It's a way of letting the water get separated physically from the line without compromising the upstream check. So if those devices spit periodically a little water out of them, those are functioning okay. It's when they're continually streaming water that they have failed. So if you ever see one that's streaming water, even if it's not time for an inspection yet, you know that that's a fail. You want to make sure that they have it in place. Those are for class 1 hazards as well, just like the air gaps. They have certain installation standards that I talked about. They should be inspected every year, and you keep those reports on file, how long?
5 years.
5 years, all right. 5 years is the nice, easy time to remember. 5 years for inspection reports, 5 years for bacteriological reports, 5 years for your storage tank inspection reports. And today, with the revised total coliform rule, 5 years if you have a level 1 assessment, all that stuff. 5 years is kind of a nice catch-all for some things, not everything, but for a lot of those things in terms of record retention. Who requires an RP? Lots of different places, potable water dispensing stations. Sometimes that might just be an air gap there, usually. Car washes, schools and colleges, anywhere where they have chemicals, like in laboratory or in science lab, biology, chemistry, all those nasty things they maybe handle and dispose of down the sink. Medical, dental, veterinarian, mortuary facilities, commercial laundries. Again, they could have water pressure coming back into lines. I kind of say, when in doubt, anybody that's a commercial establishment should have RP installed. RPs are meant for those facilities primarily, not for residential areas. So sewer plants, alternate water sources, portable tanks for water hauling, boiler systems, and there's a long list of commercial establishments in the DNR regulation on backflow prevention. There's one separate chapter of the 16 that just addresses backflow prevention or cross-connection control. And then you have double check valve assemblies. We don't have the release port here, but it is similar to the RP. It has 2 spring-loaded checks, and it is used for class 2 hazards. So if a class 1 hazard represents a health risk for our public, what does a class 2 hazard represent? What kind of hazard would that be? It would be the hazard that you might get called from a customer saying, my water looks dirty, or one of those aesthetic things. I would say aesthetics mean, fancy word mean what the customer can see, smell, taste without a microscope. Doesn't need a microscope. Just from senses, from observation. So class 2 hazard. A class 2 hazard could also be physical disruption to your water system, or a physical destruction to a water line or something. It could be a physical thing that's not a threat to people's health, but still a threat to the water system. So that would be a class 2 hazard. They have to be inspected like the RPs every year by a certified inspector, and facilities have to allow for folks to come in to do that inspection, and you need a copy of the report, keep it on file for 5 years. Same time frame for that. So what would be class 2 hazard? What would be a class 2 hazard? These are kind of limited in scope. Their primary focus is fire. So firefighters. So at the fire station, they would use class 2. Why? Double check valve for them. Well, theoretically, they use potable water to put out fire. So their water comes from you. So they don't really necessarily represent a threat. They get their water from the water system. Sprinkler system, suppression system for fire in buildings. If it is only water, then class 2 protection is sufficient, as in a double check valve assembly. If it is a chemical suppressant, sometimes you have chemical, you have foam for different types of fires. If you have a chemical injection as part of that suppression system, then it needs an RP. Sprinkler systems for irrigation, if it's water only, then double check valve assembly works, that's fine. If it's got fertilizer or herbicides or pesticides as a chemical sprayer, then it needs an RP, reduced pressure principle device, for that. So there's just an image there of the double checks. And then backflow prevention. We'll get on backflow prevention. That adds a little bit of information for us.
Every cross connection poses a different risk based on the probability of the occurrence of the following. A physical connection between the potable water supply and a hazardous substance. The occurrence of backflow conditions, back pressure, or back siphonage. The total failure of the backflow preventer used to isolate the cross connection, and the probability that a non-potable substance is present. Properly selecting a backflow preventer depends on an accurate assessment of the risk of contamination of a potable water supply. The degree of hazard, high to low, must also be identified. Installation criteria and hydraulic conditions must be evaluated by a trained professional before a backflow preventer can be installed. Several organizations set and recommend certain types of methodologies, devices, and assemblies of backflow preventers. Many devices can prevent backflow of contaminants into a water system. The degree of hazard generally determines which of the basic devices that should be used. The most common devices include an air gap, a reduced pressure principal backflow prevention assembly, abbreviated as RP, double check valve backflow prevention assembly, or DCVA, and pressure vacuum breakers, abbreviated as PVB. Air gap. Air gap is the most effective way to prevent a cross-connection by a separation between a potable water source and a non-potable source because air disrupts the flow. An air gap is not a device. Rather, it is simply physical space. An air gap may look like this, or this. The most common place you see an air gap is in a kitchen and bathroom. There should always be space between the water source and the flood level rim of the receiving vessel. Reduced pressure principal assembly. Reduced pressure principal backflow preventers, or RP, provide maximum protection against back pressure and back siphonage conditions. This device consists of two spring-loaded check valves with a pressure differential relief valve located between the checks. Water flows into the first check valve. As the first check opens, it fills the reduced pressure zone and the top of the diaphragm at the relief valve at a minimum of 2 psig, 13.8 kPa gauge. If there is a back pressure, backflow, or back siphonage, both checks will close and the relief valve will open, venting water to the atmosphere. RP is an assembly designed for both high and low hazard applications. RPs must not be installed in pits where the relief valve could become submerged. RPs should not be installed where platforms, ladders, or lifts are required for access. Double check valve assembly. This assembly consists of two internally loaded independently operating check valves installed as an assembly between two resilient seated shutoff valves and 4 properly located test cocks. In normal operation, the check valves will open to allow water to pass through. In a back pressure situation, the second check should close. If it doesn't seal properly, the first check will back up the second. The DCVA is only used for low hazard applications. Pressure vacuum breaker. This is a device designed to prevent water from being drawn back into a water supply when the line is closed. The PVB has an internally loaded check valve and an air inlet valve located on the discharge side of the check valve. The PVB is only designed to prevent back siphonage and can be used for internal protection, but not against back pressure. It should be installed where it can be easily field tested and maintained. Assemblies protecting the public water distribution system often have different needs than plumbing code fixture and appliance protection provides. It's more than placing a valve in the pipe. There are detection devices that monitor DCs and RPs that usually include a meter and bypass line or monitoring water loss, but more importantly, safety for fire protection. A double check detector assembly, DCDA, is primarily utilized in fire line installations. Its purpose is to protect the potable water supply line from possible contamination or pollution from the fire system. The reduced pressure detector assembly, RPDA, is typically only used on fire line applications. However, this assembly is intended to protect the potable water supply from fire sprinkler systems that contain chemical additives or can be connected to an auxiliary non-potable water source. There are operational limitations of certain assemblies and they may not function correctly under certain circumstances. For example, assemblies may discharge more water than building drains are designed to carry, creating flooding issues. The assembly discharge may not be potable water and/or could be toxic or harmful to sanitary sewer systems. Assemblies may not be submerged. Installers need to avoid vaults and enclosures without venting. Likewise, they should not be located near any corrosive or toxic fuels. Also, backflow protection devices must be secured and protected from vandalism, sabotage, and theft. Vandalism and/or sabotage could result from a disgruntled employee or someone not understanding the importance the backflow preventer represents in protecting public health. And due to the materials often used in backflow preventers, they may also be seen as a target for scrap metal. Plumbers and specialists who install backflow prevention devices should be aware of several factors. Service connectors, for example, will require an expansion tank for thermal expansion. Additionally, backflow preventers produce a system pressure loss, and installers should be mindful of plumbing codes and the minimum pressure of 15 psi. Service connection assemblies do not protect the building occupants from internal cross-connections. Cross-connection control and backflow prevention program requirements differ by county, parish, region, state, and province. You should check to see who sets the requirements in your area. If you have any further questions regarding backflow prevention or cross-connection control, consult the following American Water Works Association materials for more information.
A couple of things that narrator said that don't jive with Missouri. What were those two things?
20 PSI.
20 psi, right? Just mentioned the 15, minimum 15 psi. I don't know where this happened to be filmed, but presumably in that state, those standards were 15, not 20 here in Missouri, 20. And at the very beginning, when he was introducing the different types of backflow preventers, he did treat the vacuum breaker like an acceptable means, but in Missouri, they really frown on it and say that it's not acceptable because it can fail. So that's something just be aware of. It is 1:45. Why don't we have a lunch break and we'll get back at 1:45.